Would you please give me your full name and spell your last name,
Okay,
please?
my name is Robert B. Flanagan, Flanagan. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929. Uh, I attended Booker T. Washington High School here in Atlanta and Morehouse College. And after Morehouse, I was drafted or enlisted in the Air Force, and I stayed there for 16 years. I received the rank of captain, and I received a disability discharge in 1966. 1967, I took a job with the Atlanta branch NAACP as executive director, and in 1968 I was selected to be the Georgia field director for the NAACP, and in 1978 I was elected president of the Georgia State Conference of NAACP branches, and I also worked with the Voter Education Project as field director. I was elected to the National Board of Directors of the NAACP in 1985, and I serve on that board now.
Would you describe what your specific job responsibilities were as field representative and as voter registration?
Okay, as field representative of the NAACP, field director, my job was to travel around the state to investigate racial discrimination and to register people to vote. Um, and the job was pretty difficult because of the fact that blacks had been intimidated over the years and they were afraid to register, and because of fear of losing their job or violence to themselves. Um, Another thing that made it especially hard to register blacks to vote was the fact that the registration place was in the courthouse or the city hall. And the courthouse represented a symbol to black people of oppression. And they were reluctant to go down there because usually when they had to go to the courthouse, the sheriff drug them down there, and they were treated unfairly in the courts. We tried to get community registration. We felt that if we could remove registration away from the symbols of oppression, that we could get blacks to register in greater numbers. And we were fought tooth and nail by the officials, county and city officials. They didn't want to remove it from the courthouse because they knew that this would keep down the number of blacks registered to vote. So what we had to do, we organized groups and we took blacks down en masse, 15 or 20, to show them a sense of confidence, and we would help them to register. But we found that this was really an uphill battle because of the fact that the fear that blacks had. So after the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1965, we were able to go to court to get community registrations in some areas. But as a result of this, we were able to register a large number of blacks, and they voted. But we had another barrier that was set up by the white establishment, and that was at-large voting. The at-large voting system in a county works like this. You could have 5 candidates to run from various areas of a county, but everybody voted for all of the candidates, which meant that since there were more whites registered to vote in a community, um, they would elect all whites to these positions. And this frustrated our efforts to register blacks to vote, because they say, well, what difference does it make since we can't, it's impossible to elect black officials or elect white officials who are sensitive to our needs. So why register to vote? So we found it necessary to go to court to make these counties that set up this at-large system. And incidentally, this was done after the passage of the Voting Rights Act. And this was done to dilute the black vote. They were afraid that with the passage of the Civil Rights Act that the blacks would register in great numbers and throw them out.
Before the passage of the Civil Rights Act, were blacks being intimidated, or, I know you mentioned the oppression, that they were, afraid of going to the courthouse, and you moved it to a community, but were there other things that might have been happening to them at this time?
Well, before the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, they were afraid to register because they feared that they would lose their jobs. In addition to that, they did literacy tests.
Oh, okay.
You see, and they knew that some couldn't read, some couldn't write. In addition to that, other tests like how many bubbles in a bar of soap, I guess you've heard.
Yeah.
Those kind of tests. And you heard the story about this black professor who was fluent in several languages, and they asked him to interpret the Constitution in French, and he did, and in Spanish he did, and they asked him to do it in Chinese. He says, I can't do that. And he says, well, what does it say? He says, this means that you white folks ain't going to let me vote. That's what it means. These subtle and outright blatant measures were used before the passage and after the passage of the Civil Rights Act to dissuade blacks from voting.
I guess it's hard for me to imagine people not being able to vote, okay, because of that kind of thing. Were poll taxes prevalent in Georgia at all during this time?
Yes, the poll tax.
Okay.
And that was outlawed, And right after the Civil War, they had the grandfather clause. You couldn't vote unless your grandfather voted, and all that business. But that was intimidation and fear prevalent among blacks. The idea of participating in the electoral system. They didn't have to, the whites didn't have to use any overt actions. It was just an unwritten thing. Yeah, this is white folks' business,
I was doing some reading, and I read that the grand jury entered in sometimes and would appoint who was going to serve and who would be elected, these kinds of things.
Yes. The grand juries appointed school boards.
Yeah.
And there were no blacks on the grand jury because it was selected based on the voting list. And those blacks who were on the voting list weren't selected. They had the voting list set up by race.
Yeah, so that they always were able to maintain who
to maintain it. And I was talking about this at-large system. We were able to go to court in many counties in Georgia to get the at-large system thrown out and to institute district voting, wherein you vote for the people in your district would vote only for the candidate running in that district. And since we were usually in the same area of town, we were able to elect one or two blacks.
Did you find much resistance by blacks and or whites to the changes in voter, wanting to get people registered to vote?
Yes, tremendous amount of resistance from whites. They didn't realize what we realized is that to get blacks to vote would be a hard job.
Mm-hmm.
They thought that after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, that blacks would just go in droves to register to vote and would throw them out. And that wasn't the case. We had to go and prod and tell them that there's nothing to fear, that you won't lose your job. School teachers are afraid of their jobs. And it was a hard job even after the passage of the Civil Rights Act.
What kinds of strategies or techniques did you use to get blacks to vote?
Well, we started a voter education program, and we held meetings, public meetings, to show them that participating in the electoral process would help solve some of your problems, like electing the sheriff who beats you up, the police chief of the police force, or the mayor who hires the police chief, that would impact on your life, and that you should register to vote in order to make a change. In addition to that, we told them that it would change the economic situation, that more jobs would be made available to you as a result of your participating in the electoral process, and city hall jobs, county jobs, and so forth and so on. And we were able to convince them that they should participate. And we did get a lot of blacks to register, but the education process was very key, very key.
Who helped you in that process? I know, through the NAACP you had a committee, but did other community groups?
Oh yes, we had civics organizations, and fraternal organizations, sororities, and other civil rights organizations in the community.
What civil rights organizations?
Well, you had SCLC, we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
And you had a lot of other organizations that sprouted up.
Like
Remember in the
SNCC,
60s,
cool.
a lot, and then Oomp-de-Doomp, but we all worked together. Now, the Voter Education Project played a significant role in pulling together all of the civil rights groups under one umbrella to coordinate their voting efforts, and they also received money to pass out on registration and education. They also had a staff to assist in the education part of the program, set up workshops.
Oh, okay. Where did you hold your workshops?
Where did we hold our workshops? We held them in churches. And
Were the black ministers active?
black ministers, some were active, and some were not active. They were busy building bigger churches, and in order to build big churches, they had to get the money from downtown. And so they took a nonpartisan an attitude that I'm dealing in church business, I'm staying out of politics. But we explained to a Baptist minister, we told one, if you don't get your politics together, you won't stay at this church too long. The church is one big political organization. But they found all sorts of reasons. A lot of times they wouldn't make announcements. We asked them to encourage blacks to register. They wouldn't do that. We wrote scripts,
Mhm.
little statements for them to make, to encourage. Now, I'm not saying all,
Yeah.
but a lot of them didn't. And we felt that the minister saw more people at 11 o'clock on Sunday than we would ever. And we also knew that black folk believed in their pastor.
Pastors, yeah. Pastor
You see what he
yeah.
says, and we needed that influence. And we didn't get it in many instances.
And you think it was mostly related to that economic?
It was an economic thing, primarily.
In the early campaigns when you were able to get people to, well, prior to getting them to register and vote, did you find that they were more likely to be Republican or Democratic in their approach to politics?
Well, after the demise of the white Democratic primary, blacks went to the Democratic Party in great numbers. Prior to that time, we had to be Republicans, so we weren't allowed into the other club. But because of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the fact that on the scene we had John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, the people who were perceived as people who wanted to help us, we were Democrats mostly.
Were there any specific blacks who stood out as leaders during this time? When you were undergoing all of the transition and so
forth. Names of blacks in Georgia who
Yeah.
stood out? Oh yes, we had a lot of people. We had the Randalls down in Macon, Bill Randall, over in Brunswick. We had Geneva Ladd, who is the executive, who is the state treasurer of the NAACP and president of the Brunswick branch. She did a magnificent job of registration, door to door, hard registration efforts, And over in Savannah, we had W.W. Law, who was a long time NAACP man. Did a lot in the way of civil rights as well as registration and participation. In Albany, we had NAACP branches down there. And Albany is a very unique place in Blackwise. I guess you heard about that. They broke Martin Luther King's heart when he went down there to do some work, and white people got to the black leadership, and they told King that we don't need you down here, Let's ran him out of town in Albany. So we had a lot of situations where we had Uncle Toms, who were placed in key positions where they could influence a meeting, an effort, And so we had Dan Cross over in Augusta. In Atlanta, saturated with him, John Callan.
Was John Lewis active in that?
John Lewis was active with SNCC.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's what
he was
That's
SNCC.
the same one. Okay.
Yeah, John traveled and got his head beat all up and part of the King movement. And also, he was director of the Voter Education Project after Vernon Jordan left. And they, as I said, they went around all over the South registering people.
So Vernon Jordan was also...
He was also Vernon Jordan was the field director for the NAACP, Georgia field director.
Okay, I remember, but I didn't remember that he was in Georgia. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get a lot of, with the 5 black colleges out at the AU Center?
Oh, yeah.
Did you get a lot of participation from them in terms of helping with this?
Very, very active. Not only voter registration and education, but sit-ins and what have you. They're part of the student movement.
Okay. That's neat. I understand that there were some outstanding cases that took place, like the Primus King case. You want to tell me a little bit about that? If you remember it?
I don't remember that too well, the Primus King. He was out of Columbus, and I get his case confused with some others. So
Talmadge
my
and
recollection,
Carmichael.
yeah.
Do you remember anything about Talmadge?
Talmadge, which one? Herman, Senator. He was racist. Herman was a racist, just as his father was.
His father was governor.
He was governor, and Herman was governor too.
Okay.
And then Herman went on to become senator. And he couldn't pronounce the word Negro, although he graduated from the University of Georgia, Phi Beta Kappa Chi. It's a Negro. And as you know, this was the way so-called better class of whites pronounced the word. They didn't use the word nigger like those low-class whites. But anyway, after Maynard Jackson ran for the Senate in 1968 against Talmadge and took Atlanta away from him, Talmadge decided to hire an administrative assistant, a black administrative assistant. Talmadge just didn't like the idea of losing the largest city in his state. And he had been promised the black vote by some black Uncle Toms. They said that Maynard would get a significant number of votes in the black community. Talmadge had put some money in the hands of these blacks, you know. But Maynard took Atlanta, and Talmadge was very discouraged by that, and so he decided maybe I should change my ways, and he hired this black administrative assistant, Curtis Atkinson, who is president of the Assistant Secretary of State here in Georgia. So Curtis came over to me when he was offered a job and asked me whether he should take it, working for Talmadge, because he said he didn't want to be classified as an Uncle Tom or tool of Talmadge and so forth. So he had to talk to somebody. That was my first time meeting Curtis, but he came over to NAACP to talk, to get my advice on it. So I told him that Talmadge was one of the most important senators in the United States. And I said, now if we can get somebody to change his wicked ways, we need that. And I said, initially, I know you're going to take some heat from some blacks, but you can get it. He says, well, I'm going to tell the senator that I'm not going to be his person to bring him Coca-Colas only. I'm going to. So he took the job, and he got the senator to change. He showed him that blacks are registering. He showed him some figures and so forth and so on. And Talmadge went from a racist to a person who I would write letters to and tell him about some discrimination, and he would write me right back and said, I'm getting right on this. And then he'd follow up later on and says, I looked into this and blah, 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 blah. He changed his whole attitude. And that is what we could point to as what the vote can do.
Yes.
You see, that is what the vote can do, and that's what the vote did throughout the South. Because a lot of white elected politicians told me, said, Frank, I'll tell you the truth, I'd like to do something, but y'all aren't on the books. Then once you get on the books, you don't vote. So I got to dance to my constituency, you see. And so we pointed this out in our education process to get blacks to register. You can impact, not necessarily to elect a black, but you can impact on that white to get what you want. That's the name of the game.
So Curtis's state they're proved to be very beneficial.
Very beneficial. He got grants from Marsh Brown and Morehouse and Morehouse Medical School, you know, the budding Morehouse Medical School at that time. And, a lot of racial discrimination cases in the government he was able to get the senator to deal with.
So he really did change.
He
Talmadge
did.
really changed.
He changed. And we tried to save Talmadge in 1980 when Mattingly beat him. He got a large number of black votes, but we weren't able to put it out. We had Cobb County and Smyrna and DeKalb, those people that moved there couldn't fathom a man who would, you know, he was known as an alcoholic. He also, his wife said that he had a raincoat full of about $10,000 in it. You know, he filed for a divorce, and she got bitter, and she was telling everything on him. And she said he had a raincoat with 10,000 cash dollars in it. You know, and your young whites who moved into the suburbs around Metro Atlanta voted against him. Voted against that. Now, he carried on of South Georgia and what have you, but this metropolitan Atlanta did him in.
Okay. So Atlanta's been a sort of a powerful, Atlanta, Savannah,
Yeah,
and Augusta
Atlanta,
maybe.
Savannah, Augusta, Macon.
Macon. Okay. Also, I want to talk a little bit because in my reading I came across a number of school board cases where people had wanted to, you know, it was impossible for them to be elected to the school boards, and that there was a Rufus Clement election in Atlanta.
Yes.
Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, he was elected to the board of education here in Atlanta, but a lot of blacks felt that he was one of those safe blacks, and that he was put on there for decorative purposes, and that they knew that they could control him. He wouldn't rock a boat, and so he was black on the Board of Education, but he wasn't very effective.
Okay. Were there any other major campaigns that you can remember in Georgia that you feel blacks were quite effective in getting people elected or not getting them?
Oh yes, after the Voting Rights Act, and after we were able to successfully do away with at-large voting, we started electing blacks to county commissions, to city halls, to as mayors, and both school boards, and a lot of blacks were elected to office.
What do you know, sort of skipping ahead to
Oh,
that,
right, go ahead.
just out of curiosity, what do you feel that blacks have continued that kind of voting behavior, or you think we've sort of gotten a little lax?
Well, in 1979, after blacks became disenchanted with the political process, they felt that they weren't getting changes as fast as they thought that we told them they would get. You see, they said, "God, I'm voting and I'm still living over here in the slums." So, I don't see any significant number of blacks elected, and I don't see those blacks who are elected. What can they change? You have one on. What can one person do? And so we decided that maybe we should put more emphasis on voter education than registration, because we were finding that blacks, we put them on the books, and in 2 years they were purged. And purging is another system that was used to get blacks off the books. Um, Prior to our putting great numbers on the books, purging was just about unheard of. You see?
So that's a recent phenomenon.
Yes, and the recent phenomenon. They decided that they're going to go by the book. If you didn't vote in 2 elections, so we were putting them on the books and they were taking them off. So we felt that we better get down to some serious voter education. And that's what we put emphasis on. And we decided that on election day that we're going to have to take people to the polls. And that meant hiring cabs, buses, school buses, church buses, to get them, and volunteers, cars to take people to the polls.
Did you get a good reaction to those?
Yes, we got a very good action. It was well organized. And we found out that, brother, we had better change our tactics and go. Don't sit back and wait for civic responsibility, because the black can think of all sorts of reasons not to go to the polls.
I heard one of the news commentators say something to the effect during this previous election that people really shouldn't go out and vote because they didn't know what the issues were. And if you didn't know what the issues were, then you shouldn't bother to vote. And my feeling at that time was that was another technique for not getting people to vote.
Absolutely.
But I didn't get the feeling that there was very much going on in black communities by the NAACP or other organizations this go around to educate. Maybe I'm not that familiar with
this election coming up. Well, I think they felt that it was quite obvious who the good boys and who the bad boys were. The Republicans were the bad boys, and the Democrats were the good boys. Now, a lot of blacks said, I don't know the caucus. He didn't come into the black community as much as he should have. But I think what he was trying to do was win back some of those Reagan Democrats. And if he came into the black community too much, that would give the whites the impression that he's going to be our candidate only. You see, Rob in Virginia, when he ran for governor against that Republican up there, 6 years ago, went to the black community and said, look, I'm trying to beat this Republican. I must not be perceived as y'all's candidate completely, you see. He says, now, let me get in there. Help me to get in there, and then watch my action. But I got to get in there first. So if you don't see me coming around and saying what I'm going to do for y'all, be assured that I am. So the black leaders passed that word around, and he was elected.
Okay. So it was a matter of how you played.
How you play the game. We found out that was very significant, too, in the 2nd Congressional District over in South Carolina and over in Mississippi. We had the numbers to elect a man to Congress, but our civil rights leaders like Jesse Jackson, Coretta King, Andy Young would go into Mississippi, and the first thing they would do is hold a press conference saying what they were going to do, and we're going to register, and we're going to do this, and we're going to try. And they thought they were inspiring the blacks to register or to vote. But what they did was they inspired the whites to come out and vote. You see the point?
Yeah.
They scared the heck out of white folks, and they came out in great numbers. And although we had a majority vote registration in the 2nd Congressional District where SB is now, we couldn't put this guy in there, Robert Clark, who was in the House of Representatives. So I maintain that our leaders should go into the community quietly, work the black churches and work in the black community and get them out to vote and inspire. But some black leaders you can't tell that to. They must be on that too, you see. And Douglas Wilder, who's lieutenant governor in Virginia, used that tactic. He didn't ask certain black leaders in there because he knew that for every one vote that he got for him, he would cause 2 votes or 3 votes to go to his opposition, white voters. So that strategy worked. And I think we're going to have to start using more of that strategy as time passes. You shouldn't let the folk know what you're doing. And that's where it was prior to, in the 50s and the 40s.
Really, okay. Let's talk a little, some more about what has happened sort of in the second phase, if you want to call it, of the Voting Rights Act, with the passage of the acts in 57, 60, 64, then 70, 75. Do you get the feeling that there is still a need to have some federal involvement on a continuous basis in voter registration? I mean, voter rights?
Yes,
voting rights.
We need the Voting Rights Act, especially the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, the pre-clearance. We found that after the passage of the Voting Rights Act and a lot of, I mentioned this before, passed laws setting up at-large elections, getting away from district elections, and we got the Justice Department they monitor all changes to voting procedures, and they would, any change that a state wanted to make, implement, would have to go to the Justice Department. And they would call us, write us, and ask us, how did this impact on black voting? And based on what we said, they would either approve it or disapprove it. So we need all of the laws on the books, because we found that once we let up, white people go back to business as usual, that they have not changed, and we have to just watch them just as you would in your class, and you watch your students, because they will do what they want to do if they're not monitored.
Okay. I noticed in getting ready for this, I was doing some research, and I noticed that Moultrie County, Moultrie,
right.
Georgia, is constantly having problems over Section 5. There's always a move to evade it in some way.
Yes, yes.
Were you involved in that?
Well, not only Moultrie, Georgia, yes. The NAACP was involved in it, and we had a black down there to fight us hard on a change that we wanted to go to district elections, and he felt that we didn't need to go to district elections. Then he said that the way they drew up the districts meant that blacks wouldn't be able to impact in 2 districts. And what we had to do was draw it up so that blacks could elect 1 for sure, because we found out that 50% or 60% black population wasn't enough. We found out that 68% would fairly well assure us that black could get elected. In addition to that, there's another system they use, packing. Packing was that when they said, okay, let's draw it. And so their lawyers would draw an area, and they would take in all the blacks. They'd draw that thing so that they said, well, let's give them this one, and they take blacks. So what we would do, we'd go down and say, well, look, we don't want but a certain percentage here. We want to leave, say, 30% here, so that we could impact
Mm-hmm.
on the white guy who's running. You see the point?
Yeah.
And that's what you call packing when they're trying to do that. So we had to watch that too. Although we insisted on, we wanted 68% because we needed that.
It's it's apparent that they had all kinds of strategies.
Oh, they
out
stayed
here.
up all night thinking of strategies.
The reason Moultrie sort of stood out in my mind was that it was one of the few places that I had heard of where the city contracted out with the Lions Club
Yes.
to run the municipal election.
Absolutely. And that was not only true in Moultrie, but it was true in other places. And they says, well, they can come here on election day. Blacks weren't used to going to the Lions Club.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't about to go there, you see. And that was a method that was used. Another method was used. We'd have blacks at the polling place lined up, and a police car would park near the polling place. And then they would arrest somebody for something,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily for voting. And the word would get around in the black communities. They're arresting black folks who are voting, who are trying to vote. And that would scare a lot of blacks off.
I noticed that they also went to the staggered term
Mm-hmm.
process too. Did that impact on getting blacks elected?
Well, I don't think it was that significant. Greater difference,
Mm-hmm.
It had some impact.
It seems so that the at-large voting, the at-large procedure had more to do with.
Yes, because of the numbers and the ability to get their people out, you see. And if a black said that he was running and he had a black candidate, they were going to get out. I was down in Sylvester, Georgia, about in 1983. 82, we had a black. We made a mistake. We ran, too many blacks ran.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives the impression of we are taking over, you see.
Okay.
And although blacks outnumbered on the books, registration books, they outnumbered whites, we didn't get a single black elected. Some blacks voted for the white incumbents because the white incumbent got on the telephone, went around and called Mayor and said, Mayor, you remember when your welfare check didn't come in? How hard I tried to get your check for you, and I got your check, and you remember when you were sick and I did this and did that, and you mean to tell me that you're going to vote for this black guy that hadn't done anything for you, and I've done something for you? I said, that's discrimination right there.
Okay.
And Mary voted for that white guy because that white guy had done something for her.
Do you feel then that when blacks get elected that maybe they don't follow through?
Initially, we had that problem when we first elected blacks to office. They got in there and they thought that they were too above little requests that blacks would make, like, hey, they didn't pick up my garbage today, blah, 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 and so forth and so on. They weren't politically astute to the extent that constituency service can help you, it can hurt you.
I noticed also that there was the majority vote issue too, where any black plurality winner had to enter another runoff.
Yeah, second
Was
time.
was that very prevalent?
The jury is out on that. I got mixed emotions about that.
Uh-huh.
Let me tell you why. A lot of some of the thinking is that we are knocked out from getting elected in the second primary. You know, say a whole bunch of people run, and a black is in there, and so the whites will vote, knock each other out, you know, and then the blacks will go vote for that one person and say he's elected. And if you have the second primary, although the first and the second, unless he gets over 51% of the vote, you have a second primary, you know, in the election. So anyway, they said that when it came down to two, the white and the black, then all the whites who voted for the four other whites would vote for the white, and the blacks couldn't get elected. Well, that's true. That's a good argument. But also, the argument could be if a black is running and a friendly white is running and a KKK member is running, and say it comes down to the black and the KK, number one, and number two, and the good guy, white, is not in the running, and all the whites would vote for that KKK guy. And we'd have to live with a racist as mayor, you see. So there's arguments both sides, but really the NAACP hasn't taken a position on it yet. Two schools of thought on it.
I know you mentioned the KKK. Did they take any actions against blacks who, you know, were attempting to register, or blacks who were going out to vote?
Yeah, they were out there with their uniforms on, you know. They would make telephone calls, burn crosses. And then you had some people in civilian suits, KKK thinking people, you know, and the boss would say at a meeting, I know you blacks didn't plan to vote for you. And gosh, they didn't vote. And in addition to that, they wouldn't give them time off to vote. The black wouldn't go in and say, boss, let me off, I want to go vote, you know.
Do you feel that still happens today?
No, not as a general rule. And as a matter of fact, I would say that it's not happening today, but I don't. I haven't received any complaints on that, because I think there's more of an acceptance of blacks voting now, and what's going on is that the white candidate is appealing. If the numbers are there, he's going to appeal to the blacks to vote for him. And this is what we have been fighting for, is that we want candidates to come to us and ask us for our votes and make some promises.
Do you see any problems today with the kinds of actions that candidates take with regards to blacks, you know, black voters?
Do I see the candidate doing better by blacks? Oh yeah. Throughout Georgia, we have found that those candidates who are put in office with the help of the black vote is very sensitive to black needs.
Think this makes it more difficult for blacks to be elected, or?
It makes the black candidate try harder. You know, in Atlanta, we have a white person on the city council who's from 80% black district.
Okay. So it's a matter of, as you were saying before, how much energy.
That's
they
right.
want
She
to
was
put in.
community activist and did a lot of work in the black community prior to running. And she got in there. They liked her and put her in there. Matter of color. Effectiveness.
I noticed that you said earlier that you felt that we needed to learn how to go in quietly
Yes.
and bring about change. Um, is that one, you see any other strategies that you think blacks need to adhere to in order to be elected to office or more involved?
Well, they're doing it now. At one time we were just black this, black that, and hard talk, and what have you. What we're finding now is that the black candidate he has some white constituents. He is not taking a hard attitude towards any particular issue, He's trying to give the impression that he wants to be the candidate of all the people, and it's paying off. Still was elected to the superintendent's post over in Douglas County, Republican. But Douglas County is beyond Six Flags over there.
Okay.
Mostly white. And so he was elected. He is doing the same thing that whites are doing now, is that they straddle the fence and promise talk out of both sides of the mouths.
Seems to be.
Sure, they are politicians. They're politicians.
Can't do anything about politicians.
Absolutely.
They gotta be a politician. Do you think that there is a need for any specific policy changes, either at the local or state levels, with
Voting.
regards to voting?
Well, we need to make it easier to register. Postcard registration, our own site registration. When you go up to vote, you can register.
That would be a drastic change.
Yeah, drastic change. As a matter of fact, postcard registration, we may be able to get that. You see, the reason that there's so much opposition to registration, and the reason that it's not easy to register historically, and this is across the board, the incumbent doesn't want a large constituency. They don't want a lot of people on the books because they have to gear their programs to a variety of interests, you see. So if he can keep registration down, by gosh, he won't have, So, as I said, he doesn't want too many whites on the books either.
Yeah, I know DeKalb County at one time did not want to have sort of open mass voter registration, like in the mall or any place.
They fought it, community, they fought it. Because it's so easy to register. You can have some people at the table and have some people, little pretty girls run out there and grab, come on over here, come, and ready to put them on the books. In addition to that, a lot of people couldn't write. A lot of people can't, they can write, don't write well enough or can't read well enough to instruct, these things. But see, if you have somebody out there volunteer, they'll show them, help them to register. They won't get embarrassed.
Which makes a lot of difference.
It makes a lot of difference. Guys say, I want you to go down the courthouse. He can't hardly read. That woman said, what do you want? And talk harsh to him. And then say, hey, fill this out.
How do you feel about the Voter Registration Act having to be renewed, periodically?
Yes. We need it renewed. It should be a permanent thing, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it should be a permanent thing until we have some big changes in attitude to people. Because as soon as it's done away tomorrow, the officials will set up barriers to blacks getting on the books.
So you don't feel that the bottom line attitude has changed that much?
Racism is still there.
Okay.
It's still there. And that's what these young people better understand. Just because they're not called nigger and boy and all that business, it's there. You see.
Do you feel that there have been any key cases of the 1980s that are significant in relationship to voting acts?
Well, we've gone to court a number of times to get at-large voting schemes thrown out, district voting replaced. And that has caused a significant number of black elected officials and friendly white officials elected. That's key. Also, recently, we've gone to court in Carroll County on one-man county commission. As a matter of fact, a lot of whites didn't necessarily like that. Because if they're out with him, they're out with him, you see. and naturally we would be out, on the outside. So we went to court and said that this diluted the black voting strength and blah, blah, blah. And the courts now have ruled that they threw it out there. So they have a 5-man or 6-man commission over in Carroll County. There are several other counties too where it has been filed, successfully completed.
So progress is occurring.
Progress is occurring, but you got to, nobody's giving it to you. You have to go either the court to get it or through the Justice Department to get it, through protests, marches and everything.
Do you think we've gotten away from that in terms of that, those strategies being essential or important to maintaining the right to vote?
Which one?
Either marches or...
Marches are not as effective as they were in the 60s and 70s because it's too programmed. It doesn't scare anybody, for one thing. You get a parade permit and you have your plan and you present it to the people and they say, we're going to march from point A to point B. We're going to get there, we're going to pray, we're going to sing, and then we're going to orderly march back. So that didn't impact on anybody. You see. In the 60s, they didn't know what was going to happen with King and sneaking up and having a march. And NAACP, they know if you're going to break it and kill white folks, and white folks scared to death. But now it doesn't impact them because then you have policemen there guiding you and what have you.
So you think they may need to find another strategy?
Well, the strategy is registration and voting. That's what the strategy is because we have made tremendous changes. I mean, have taken place. Tremendous changes have taken place since we have been voting in great numbers. You see.
What impact do you think the 84 and 88 Jackson campaign had on the grassroots level?
A tremendous impact on them in that Jesse was the hero. He articulated, he had the ability to break things down for them, and so he caused a lot of them to register to vote. Now Jackson didn't have the people out there to do the registration, but he was the man that encouraged. Now you had NAACP branches and other organizations with the people actually doing a significant number of registration, you see. But Jackson was the catalyst, and we have this tremendously in showing blacks that this enchanted blacks who had participated, but they said, heck, and no changes have been made. He showed them that you can make a change, you can make a difference. And the fact that he went as far as he did this last time and running for the presidency impressed him quite a bit.
Do you think the fact that he wasn't the candidate may have impacted black voting in the 88 election?
No, because any reasonable person would have known that he couldn't get elected. The numbers are not there. And that what we're doing is making a statement. And we appreciate the fact that we had a man on TV articulating things other than welfare and food stamps. He was talking about foreign policy and budgets and deficits, you see. That impressed blacks and impress whites that here blacks are talking about other things other than welfare, food stamps. So that's how he helped us, because we had an image problem. You see, we had an image problem, and he was a good image for us.
Do you feel that there's more that organizations like the NAACP, SCLC, perhaps could be doing in terms of preparation of leaders to, help with that image problem, which then would lead to, more strength in the voter?
And I don't know about SCLC, but I know NAACP has a youth program, youth chapters throughout the United States, and they participate in programs, you see, they're learning. And we also have AXO, that's the scientific and arts and so forth. That's a program that Hooks brought in. He came
That's
in,
new. Okay.
and we emphasize blacks in engineering and the other things other than football and basketball, and we give awards. We have the different units have people, they hold competitions, and then they have a big competition, those who win at the national convention, and they're giving out scholarships and awards for different things that they develop scientifically, so forth, in the arts. And it's our answer to so much football and basketball and athletics.
Yeah. During all the registration drives and voter education drives, did you have organizations like the Shriners and Masons getting involved with you in these?
Yes, they did. And not only that, they put the money where their mouth was, and they were very active with us.
What do you think, out of all the things that we've talked about and all the things that you have experienced as a field rep and as the person responsible for voter registration in the state of Georgia?
The one thing that stood out in my mind over the years of voter registration and education was to see this 80-year-old black man go to the poll and vote, because he was the man that we had to really work on, because he had been brainwashed by white folks. And to see his face when he came out of the voting booth, and that smile on his face, participating in the electoral process, really impacted on my mind.
I can imagine that would be something that would be very difficult to forget.
Yeah, because that said it all.
Yes.
That said it all. That says, well, we have arrived when we got him. And there he was. He went in there and he got rid of his fears, and he registered, voted. And significant. The most significant thing about it was that he almost missed the vote.
Oh, okay.
Almost missed the vote.
When was this? When did
This was in the 70s.
Mm-hmm. Those were some trying times.
And the thing about it is, young people don't understand it, and old people have forgotten it.
That is
But
true.
I can't forget it, because I used to drive through there, and when I got home, I was so glad. And I used to drive from McIntosh County, Darien, Georgia, to Brunswick. I went down to Darien, Georgia, to investigate a sheriff brutality case. We met at the Mason Hall, and we stayed there until around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And we knew that we had some of the sheriff's people in there, blacks who would tell him what was going on. And they took me, after the meeting, instead of my heading straight for Brunswick, I stopped by the leader's house. NAACP Garden House. And I stayed there a few minutes, and see, that gave the Toms time enough to get the word, back, and they set something up. And finally, when I left to drive that stretch, about 17 miles from Darien to Brunswick, a car was behind me, showed up behind me, and stayed and had bright lights on me, And so I got down to the 50 and it stayed right on my tail, and I thought all sorts of things. I said, who is that? Is that the sheriff or what? Mm-hmm. So finally, the car pulled around, and it was a policeman, but he went after another car. And I felt, but during those 20 minutes, I thought all sorts of things like, what in the world am I doing out here? Yeah. I wish I was home with my mother, And it was, but after I got to Brunswick rather, and checked in the hotel and everything, and I forgot about it, But you had a lot of experiences where you almost were near death, or somebody going to do something to you. And once you escaped it or it didn't happen, it didn't make you afraid to go back. You see? So you wonder whether or not you had good sense You think you'd learn your lesson. But a lot of people just don't know what it was like, the civil rights movement, and the fears. Mm-hmm. I had one young man who came to work with me, and we traveled all over. And he was right out of Miles College, and he's talking about his rights and everything. Nobody, and we got down. I said, look, let me tell you something. When you down here, you ain't got no rights. You forget about that. I said, the name of this game is get down here, get this job done, and get back. Mm-hmm. You see? And if we stop, don't you jump out of this gun and tell that cop, I got some rights and blah, he's going to bust your head open, you see. Mm-hmm. So I had to show him that in this kind of work, you better have some fears if you're going to survive. Yeah. You see, you better have some fears and respect for what could happen to you, you see.
Is there anything else that you think you want to share at this time?
No,
okay. Are there any other people, other than the ones that you mentioned earlier, that you feel would be beneficial for us to interview?
Have you talked to the people over at, where are you going? Will you go out of Atlanta? I think you ought to talk to Ed Brown down in Camilla, Georgia. He's the civil rights activist down there in NAACP who caused the registration and the election of a lot of blacks down in southwest Georgia, who would have a lot to say about that area. See, southwest Georgia is the black belt, and that was the hardest place to conquer. We're still trying to conquer it, but it was tough because of the number of blacks. That put the fear of God in white folks' minds, so they fought as hard. And Ed Brown has interesting stories to tell. Some things he had to go through. It's Camilla Georgia. I'll give you his telephone.
Okay, please do.
Now, you talked to Lachlan McDonald, didn't you? People at ACLU.
Not yet. Okay. Lachlan McDonald.
Lachlan, L-A-U-G, like Lappin, Lachlan, McDonald. They were the ones who filed our court cases for us. Okay. The worship methods. And along with NAACP, of course, national. Talk again from anybody over there in this that's the southern region of Georgia, the southern region. Used to be 52 Valley. You could talk to the people over at the Vote Education Project too. They're over on the AU podcast now.
Okay, I'll get those.
Okay, you. They have a lot of research material too.
Oh.
They also research of the voting situation.
Okay.
So they did a lot of studies
Okay.
that you should review.
Okay. This is very good. Well, I thank you very much.
All right.